you guys. Okay, so this is our first installment of our Pax Read Aloud. We have already begun reading this book in school, but we never finished it before we left. So I'm going to pick up where we left off on chapter 13. When you are listening to this, I would like you to have your distance learning notebook right there by your side. And every once in a while, I'm going to ask you to pause the video and to jot some things. And oftentimes I'll give you ideas of what to jot, and sometimes I'll just ask you to jot what you're thinking. All right, so here we go. Chapter 13, from Pax's perspective. When Pax awoke, it was late afternoon. The ache that had cramped his belly the past few days was worse. And when he tried to rise, he lost his balance for a second, his muscles trembling. He surveyed them for injury with a distanced curiosity. Once, when he'd been ill, his boy had forced a pill down his throat. Afterward, his senses had been dulled and his reactions slowed. He felt the same way now. He dropped to the cool dirt and watched as below Gray and his mate emerged from their rests to scent the air, relieve themselves, then set off for food. Bristle sprang out from a den beside him, stopped only to order her brother to stay behind, then trotted off to hunt also. On the day he'd gotten into the car with the boy, Pax had sensed the tension and refused his morning kibble. So it had been 3 full days since he'd eaten. Although Pax had never seen death, he understood that it awaited him if he did not find food. This thought produced no sense of urgency and drifted away. A second thought, however, that he must find his boy and see him safe, stirred him to rise again, first bracing himself on his forelegs before straightening his haunches. After a moment, his head cleared. He wandered past the dens Bristle and Runt shared. There he smelled caches of game buried in the earth. But they were marked with powerful warning scents, so he did not dig them up. Farther out, a few gnawed-over carcasses were discarded to be scoured clean by lower-ranking scavengers. Pax began to poke through the carrion. Only the tail end of a marsh rat held any meat at all. Too rancid and grisly, even for the crows. It was crawling with maggots. So take a minute here to pause and jot maybe a visual of what you get from this section of the text. Pax lowered his head to the remains. He opened his jaw, but the smell sent him reeling back. This was not food. He staggered back a few steps and buried his muzzle in a patch of new clover, chewing the sprouts to cleanse the foul odor from his sensitive nasal passages. He swallowed and then began to feed tentatively. The act of eating was a comfort to his shrunken belly, although a false one. The clover wouldn't strengthen him. After a few mouthfuls, that clear thought arose again. He must find his boy. Just then, he heard something tear through the grass. Before his sluggish senses could respond, he felt a solid weight plow into him. Runt pounced on top of Pax, crowing at his successful ambush. When Pax didn't move to shake him off, Runt began to examine him. Pax lay still, while the smaller fox sniffed and licked him, too weak to waste energy batting him away. Unwell? Pax closed his eyes against the low glancing sunlight and did not respond. Runt bounded off and came back a few minutes later with a worm hanging from his jaw. He dropped it at Pax's paws. Pax shrank away. But the thoughts he'd had earlier surfaced again. He had to find his boy. He could avoid death if he ate. Pax picked up the worm and bit into it. Unused to the taste of live flesh, Pax retched and twisted away. Runt dug up another worm and dropped it in front of Pax. And this time, Pax got to his feet and took a few steps before sinking back down. Runt followed and nudged him. Eat! Pax mustered as much dominance as he could. Leave! So right here, I want you to take a moment to jot. I'm going to show you the illustration that I just passed while I'm giving you your idea to jot. But basically, I want you to think about why Pax is so so defiantly resisting Runt's urges to help him. The illustration isn't great to see in the camera, but you can see the two foxes, and you can see something in front of the foxes and the dens that they were in. So just take a minute to think about why Pax is resisting the Runt's attempts to help him. The younger fox gazed at the older one for a moment, then turned and trotted into the grass. Relieved, Pax laid his head on his paws. He did not have the energy for resistance now. But Runt reappeared after a few moments, something round in his mouth. He dropped his gift, and it broke open. Egg. The scent called up a sharp memory. Once, when he was very young, Pax had found a hard white orb while exploring his human's kitchen counter. He'd batted at it, thinking it was one of his boy's playthings. It had rolled onto the floor and cracked open, spilling its delicious secret. Peter's father had come in while he was still licking at the last drops and smacked him away. His flank had stung from the blow, but that egg had been worth it. Since then, Pax managed an exploratory visit to the kitchen counter every time he was left alone, looking for more of them. A few times, he'd gotten lucky. The quail egg Runt had brought was smaller, its speckled shell flecked with dried grass, and it smelled gamier than the ones his humans ate. But there was no mistaking it. Egg. Pax rose. Runt backed away to allow Pax to lap up the yolked prize. He licked the grass clean of every drop, then looked up, eager to express his gratitude. Runt was gone. But in a few moments, he came back. 2 more eggs held carefully in his mouth. Pax devoured them. Runt left and returned twice more. Pax ate steadily until finally 7 eggs, swelling his shrunken belly taut. He dropped to the sandy apron in front of the dens and closed his eyes. Runt leaped onto a gnarled root above the dens. He drew himself up to his full height. And while Pax slept, the ragged little runt kept watch. Okay, so before we stop, I would like to give you a couple ideas that I'm thinking. One thing I was thinking while I was reading, um, there was a phrase that the author used that really caught my attention, and I thought it was worth discussing with you. And I would like you to take a minute to listen to it one more time and jot an idea or a description of what you think this phrase means. So it's about the egg, and it's when Pax is remembering finding it on the kitchen counter. He said he'd batted at it thinking it was one of the boys' playthings. It had rolled onto the floor and cracked open, spilling its delicious secret. So, why do you think the author calls the contents of the egg a delicious secret? Why choose those words? So, jot a little bit about what you think that could mean and maybe even draw a visual of that. Then, one last thing before we stop, because that's the end of chapter 13, is I was noticing a strong comparison between Vola and Peter and how their relationship is going, and Runt and Pax and how their relationship is going. And I was noticing some similarities. So I want you to think about that. And I want you to think about, has there ever been a time that you can connect to this, that you cared for someone and took care of them when they were in need? Or the other way around, maybe when someone took care of you while you were in need, and how that kind of is showing itself in these chapters. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed chapter 13 of Pax, and I'll see you next time. And I'm looking forward to it. See you later, guys.